All right, everybody, welcome to the Rapid City Legal and Finance Committee meeting for October 31st, 2018. I'd like to start this meeting off with a roll call and determination of quorum, please. Here.
Here.
Great. Now that a quorum has been established, I would like to welcome a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
To adopt.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any further discussion? Okay, motion carries. Let's move on to our general public comment for items number 1 through 19. Let's open this up to public comment. Anyone wishing to speak? Oops, sorry. Sorry, this is the time for any member in the audience to discuss items currently not on today's agenda. Any other speaker request forms? All right, thank you. All right, the public portion is now closed, and we'll move on to our consent agenda. Okay, items on the agenda 1 through 19. Now we'll open that up to public comment. We have one speaker request form from a Mr. John Roberts.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. John Roberts, 840 North Spruce, Rapid City, South Dakota. I'm here to talk about item number 6, and it's line item 17 on your assessments. Wow, that's loud. The reason I came in to speak, there's a couple of things. One, I didn't realize that we were going to get charged for a late fee before I had a chance to speak on this. We were invoiced on this 9/20 of 18, and it was due 10/4, and actually I had our property manager send a check 10/16 because it hadn't came in front of this body yet, and this check was returned to us because we owed a late fee on it, which I kind of think is a little strange that you're going to charge me a late fee before I have a chance to speak on the item. And, you know, typically in business, you don't charge somebody a late fee 3 weeks after you invoice it out, but that's just different. So anyway, the reason I wanted to speak on this is this property in question is one of many properties that I'm part owner of through this group. And one of the things that we do is we buy and we rehabilitate properties in Rapid City for affordable housing. And I was just speaking with Barb back here a minute ago. This is a 3-bedroom property, and in Rapid, typically 3-bedroom properties are $1,100-1,200. This one we rent for $835 a month. So we try to keep all of our properties anywhere from 70 to 80% of the market value. You know, I've been talking about on the city council about affordable housing for many, many years, and me and some other people decided a few years back that we couldn't wait forever for the city, so we had to do some of this on our own. So I'm just teasing, that was a joke. But we are trying to do something for the city of Rapid City for affordable housing. So anyway, I just want to go back. I want to say, you know, this was just kind of a perfect storm. When we rent out these properties, we rent them out, and part of the agreement is that the people that rent from us take care of the properties. Well, our renter had a family emergency, was gone, the yard got long, and it just happened that our property manager was on vacation too. But we don't have a problem with that. Like I said, I got a check for $202, and I don't mind paying that. But I think as a council, I think we should take a look at these. I went out and I talked to a few professional, you know, companies that take care of yards, and they gave me a quote about a quarter of what the city's getting charged to have this mowed. So I think maybe we should look at going out and RFPing these. Maybe we can get a little better deal for the citizens. I mean, you know, I think that it's pretty ridiculous when I get charged something and I can get on a maintenance contract and have it done twice a month for half of what I was charged for this one, plus because I didn't pay another $100 fine. You know, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous in my opinion. And also, I'm very curious about the fact of if I can be charged a $100 late fee before I have a chance to speak on the item. So anyway, and if you waive the $100 fee, I've got a $202 check here and we could take care of it today. or Monday night, doesn't matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to speak on that? Okay. All right, thank you. General public portion is now closed, and we're going to move on to our consent items. Today's consent items on the agenda are items 1 through 19. Are there any items that need to be pulled? Okay. Oops.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pulling item 14, please.
Okay, item 14. Mr. Lewis?
Item number 6, please.
6. Bring it in? Okay. All right. All right, let's approve, let's have a motion to approve items 1 through 19 with the exception of number 6 and number 14, please.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Drury, second by Mr. Laurenti. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Let's address number 6. Mr. Lewis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to make a motion to move this item to council without recommendation.
Okay,
Can I get a second? I'll explain.
Second.
I just think it warrants a full discussion of the council. I don't know that I have an opinion yet. I just want to take some time to think about it a little bit before I make a recommendation one way or the other.
So the motion is to move it to council on Monday? Yes. Okay. All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, thank you. All right, moving along to number 14. Mr. Solomon? You have the floor? Do we? Okay. All right, number 14, authorize the mayor and finance officer to sign fiscal year 2019 performance contract between the City of Rapid City and the Black Hills Council of Local Governments.
Thank you. May I direct a question to Ken Young, please? Hey, Ken, so just to be clear to all of us, is this replacing what Barb Garcia, who is leaving the department but is here today, are they taking over the responsibilities for the program in lieu of that position? Or is this an additional? I guess maybe give us some background, please.
Okay. So Barb, as you may have heard, is planning to retire, and we are in the process of hiring someone to replace her. But particularly what we're talking about on this contract is you may also be aware that recently we lost her administrative assistant through resignation. And what we determined to do, knowing that Barb was looking at retiring, that we wanted to review the entire program and see how we might administer it in a better or more effective way or more efficient way. So we reached out to the Black Hills Council of Local Governments and a couple other entities in the community to see if anybody would be interested. We found that Black Hills Local Council of Governments does a lot of this same stuff already, and sat down with them. And so what we're doing with them is to replace some of the functions that the administrative assistant was doing, namely the environmental reviews for the projects that are receiving funding and some other administrative functions that were being done there. So rather than filling the administrative assistant position, we are contracting with Black Hills Local Council of Governments to do that portion of the work, and then we will be replacing Barb with another person, or filling her position with another administrator or manager for that program.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. And since Barb Garcia is in the audience today, Barb, thank you for your years of service to Rapid City. We wish you all the best in your retirement, and we'll look forward to seeing you around still. Thank you. I yield.
All right, so I would welcome a motion for item number 14. Move to approve. Okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? All right, motion carries. All right, now on to non-consent items 20 through 21. Public comment is now open. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak? Okay, all right, so we'll close public comment and we'll continue to number 20. We We have an introduction and first reading of ordinance number 6289 regarding supplemental appropriation number 7 for 2018. I'd welcome a motion.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
And second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. And finally, we have number 21, a presentation from our community development on TIF policy overview.
Well, committee members, council members, I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation to you. Patsy and I have been working on this for quite some time. Most of you know that we've been talking about potential revisions to the TIF policy for longer than I've been here, and but we have put quite a concerted effort into the review and proposal over the last year. I'm glad we have 5 of you here. That's great. We got down to 2 yesterday, but that's fine. We're trying to catch you whenever we can, and I'm thankful for a very short agenda otherwise so that we have opportunity to present this to you. Please feel free to ask questions as we go through the presentation. We're going to try to keep it short, hopefully under a half an hour, and we'll just take it as we go. Now, I fully anticipate that we may need further review after today. We will invite any of you to come meet with us individually, and we will answer your questions, or if you would like to email us, we can handle it that way. However, we can do our review with you so that you feel comfortable with what the proposal is, and you have your questions answered. Any concerns or issues you feel we're not addressing properly or efficiently, then we would like to know that as well. We would hope to move forward with a proposal to come forward for official review and approval sometime soon, but we don't want to rush that process. We want to make sure that we're meeting all of the needs as we go through the process. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So let's see, who did we have at our Wednesday meeting? I guess it was just Laura. So what we have done is we have uploaded onto our community development page on the city website some video clips from that meeting of Wednesday night. We also have the slide presentation that they presented available for you there as well. So we had really hoped to get a majority of the council to that meeting, but unfortunately that didn't work out. But we did feel that the information that they offered us was very beneficial to look at our sister city in South Dakota, our bigger sister, if you will, and see how they're operating their TIF program. We learned a lot from them. Patsy and I both went out on a TIF trip, if you will, and met with some cities. We stopped at Aberdeen and Sioux Falls and learned how they're doing their programs, and invited specifically Sioux Falls to come out and make presentation to us, because we felt that we had most in common with what they're doing, and also most in common with how we're making our proposal and moving forward with our revisions. So we feel like the information we garnered from that presentation from them last Wednesday night was very helpful, and I'm going to do just a brief review of some of the highlights that they presented in their presentation. First is Sioux Falls, being about 3 times larger than we are, has a total of 21 TIF districts, which compared to our 80 gives some perspective. 18 of their 21 have been in their core areas, either in their downtown area or in core neighborhoods close to downtown. 12 of them currently are active. We have just a small handful in our core areas, and we have 24 active. Another key point that they made was that their focus for the TIF program is on improving downtown and their core neighborhoods. And the TIF guidelines that they have, which we felt had some key points that we'd like to share, is that they encourage redevelopment of blighted and deteriorated areas. That seems to be a key focus for their TIF program. Stimulating economic development with long-term vitality, stimulating private investment in areas that would otherwise remain undeveloped or underdeveloped. Offsetting extraordinary development costs is a key focus. One thing that we learned that they pay a lot of attention to and are very careful with in their approval process is making sure that the costs that might seem or be otherwise deemed eligible are not always necessary for the TIF financing project. And so they focus in homing in on what those costs are that are absolutely necessary to make this project work. And then it is dedicated to the reimbursement of eligible costs considered to be necessary. So I just went over that. A few other things. The projects for the application they receive must show a financial gap necessitating TIF, passing the but-for test. So but for the TIF financing, this project couldn't happen. That's a key point. And third-party review of the project costs with their applications is a very important point. We picked that up from them as an important objective, and we have put that into our proposal to make that happen for third-party review, that we can not only have staff eyes or TIF review team eyes, but we can have that the experts taking a look at it. And agreement based on the financial gap. So we prepare a development agreement with the applicants that is based on that financial gap, listing and capping the amount of eligible expenses. And then also the certification is based on actual costs as listed in the agreement. By doing some of these things, it cleans up the process both of review and certification. Makes it a lot simpler, and I think we have learned a lot through that process to determine how we can be more efficient in our program. So through the last year, we've, in making our determinations of possible revisions to the policy, we've asked questions: why do we need to do this? What are the needs? What is the main reason we're even coming forward? Well, we came up with three. I'm sure there's others. But the three that we believe are important are, number one, to focus on promoting new infill development and redevelopment within the core areas of the community. We do have a lot of opportunities, a lot of either underdeveloped or undeveloped properties in the core area of the community, or properties that can be combined that could take well advantage of TIF financing. Number two, to improve and simplify the staff review and certification processes. Just reviewed that. Number three, to ensure that the TIF public financing tool is used responsibly and only when determined necessary. In other words, the project could not be built without TIF. So here's a map showing our TIF districts that we've had approved and in place since '78 when we got our program started. And you'll see the lines of our core areas, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that shows that a lot of our TIF districts have been approved on the outskirts of the community. Some of the highlights of the change are the chart description. We're adding that into the policy just as a basic understanding or information of exactly what happens with TIF financing. Some people don't understand that it's that additional areas. You see the yellow triangular box is those funds that are achieved because of the increased value of the development on the property, and it's from those funds that the TIF financing is paid. So there is no funds being taken from any other existing tax source to do this financing. So we've updated verbiage throughout the policy. We've cleaned up a lot of areas, including base requirements for approval. And we've introduced this idea of priority areas. And so here's the two rings with the box in the middle. So the box in the middle would be the original town boundaries of the east and west and north and south boulevards. And then we have a mile outside of that creates So it's a mile, a block mile within downtown, then we increase that mile around that. That would be what we consider our core area, our core community, and that would be a priority area for granting TIF approvals. The additional blue line area is 2 miles outside of the core or the original town boundaries, which we would consider to be a secondary or a second priority. And if you'll note by the roadways that go through there, the second priority area extends well beyond and above the freeway. It includes a lot of the developments areas there and includes most of the developed area of the community or the more historically developed area of the community. It also includes in the purple lines and purple stars revitalization nodes and revitalization corridors, some of which extend out beyond the priority areas, but we would consider those to be first priority if they fall within those corridors or nodes. We also have a priority use identified, or a couple of them. The first would be a use on the project which includes both cleaning up blight and introducing affordable housing in the project. Now this is a chart, I'll turn some time over to Patsy here to explain what is on the chart that we've introduced.
So with the 2017 legislature, they approved what's called an affordable housing classification that allows generally what we're identifying in our policy as workforce housing, where the first-time home buyer's price is $250,000 or less, and then they have to also meet some income guidelines. This is based generally on about 115% of our average median income. But we also wanted to focus some TIF funds potentially on affordable housing, which is at least 80 to 30% of our AMI, because there are some folks that generally can't afford that. So we came up with a couple different classifications for housing definitions, the affordable and then the workforce. And one of the benefits of having affordable housing as a specific criteria in our policy is that with an affordable housing TIF, instead of generally a locally funded TIF where only the residents of the school district are assessed any additional property taxes for, where the property taxes are collected for the school district's portion within the school district property itself, any property within our school district boundary. But now with an affordable housing TIF, it's considered similar to an economic development housing TIF where everybody across the state then helps participate in reimbursing those school funds associated with the TIF district.
So that would be one of the priority uses that we've identified. So blight is defined as shown here, residential areas with at least 20% of 8-year taxable valuation decrease, or non-residential areas with stagnant growth determined by less than 30% increase in an 8-year taxable valuation. So we have, with that, identified many properties that fall within our boundaries or throughout the city that meet these criteria of blight. So many that are within the core community and within the secondary priority area. Many opportunities exist there for tax increment financing. Another targeted use is including both blight and economic development. Now it could be that we're doing both economic development and affordable housing, or it could be one or the other, but we are identifying them separately here. I'll read through what our definition is, and we may play with that a little bit more, adding some verbiage that would allow for some other type of evidence economic development impact. But we're trying to hone in on something that has been promoted by our Rapid City Economic Development Foundation as key industries and economic impact measuring tools. So I'll read through that. New or expanded wealth generating industries targeting healthcare and life sciences, research, financial and insurance, professional business services, including engineering and IT, metals manufacturing, energy, and small-scale food and beverage manufacturing. So those are our key targeted industries. The project will generate at least one new full-time job from at least one of these industries for each $75,000 in principal value of the tax increment financing, or would create a significant number of new jobs that meet or exceed the targeted hourly rate by Rapid City Economic Development. So again, those are some measuring devices, but I think we can expand that a little bit to allow for other components that might make up a significant economic development impact. So another targeted use, of course, would be just the implementation of the plans that we already have in place, so that if we could follow or meet the objectives of our plan, Rapid City, our comprehensive city plan, our downtown master plan, utility system master plan, and the consolidated plan for community development block grant. We want to make sure whatever we're doing is meeting those objectives. So in moving forward in the project management of a TIF application, taking it through the process, we determined there were a few things that we could do to improve that process. And so we took a look first at what is happening in the application and review, or the review of the application. We currently have a process set up where the TIF review team, otherwise, what is the current name of that? TIF committee. So, but they are scheduled to have a public meeting with noticing and anybody's involved, so that we get a lot of public involvement into an application that is not yet approved. And so we felt like, looking at examples from other cities, including Sioux Falls, they do not do this, and it is not required by the state. We feel like it would be a much more efficient and effective way to do in-house review with a committee that's made up of staff, including finance, community development, public works, and the representative of, or the president of the Economic Development Partnership. So with that, we would also take this team and present the information to the school district and to the county when that is brought forward. The applicant, prior to it moving through this team process, the applicant would meet with staff and the team to discuss how they might prepare better their application, or what are the key components they ought to be focusing on. So we anticipate that a large amount of effort will go into the pre-application process, so that we can all kind of be on the same page, so we're not going against each other as far as how we're meeting goals or not before it actually comes forward for official review and application. So they may, through that process, determine that it's not worth their time or effort to even apply, but we want to make sure that we spend that time with them in advance. The project plan and agreements are then prepared as we move forward through the approval process, and so that when it comes forward to the City Council, we have a project plan and we have agreements ready to go. We've got all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and we're ready to go with what the expectations are, what the eligible costs are, what the timeline is. All that is done in advance. City manages the public improvement projects, including the design, construction, and construction management. That's not something that we've typically done, but we do see other cities doing that. It does simplify the process and makes the certification of the costs much easier.
One of the questions that we have already received is, are we going to have to add staff for this particular proposal? And no, actually the existing staff will already take this under their own existing project load, so no additional staff proposed at all.
Well, and I would add to that by simplifying these processes, it's going to allow one of our staff members who just spoke, who is 100% focused on TIFs almost at this point, who has many other duties under her job description, that will free up a little bit of her time by simplifying these processes. We also have identified several guiding principles that will guide the review and the application, and I'm going to let Patsy review those with you.
So first, we want to make sure that there's no guarantee of approval when somebody comes in to talk to us about a TIF. I think in the past and currently, there might be some expectation that, if they visit with a few people, they've got a really good chance of getting it through, and we want to make sure that it's clearly identified that there's no guarantee that a TIF is going to be approved, and that they have to provide adequate information that a TIF is really necessary for what they're proposing, and that we are also encouraging no more than a 10-year payoff. And then we've included the affordable housing information. We've identified specific economic development references. We want to use TIFs for only blight or excessive development costs. No subdivision required costs identified in any kind of TIF funding proposal. That all of the funding is through private sources, not through any kind of bond that the city might go through, or any kind of additional city funding, unless it's specifically identified as a necessity to make other connections. For example, one of the TIFs several years ago included a portion of extending Tisch Boulevard to Seeger Drive. Well, the city didn't have any funding in its CIP program, so that particular portion of the project didn't move forward. But we want to make sure that it's identified up front that the city's not going to be providing any kind of financial assistance other than the TIFs. And then the financing costs are based on the increased value. We've got additional compliance regulations that we want to throw in there. The taxation currently with apartment buildings, apartment owners can request tax abatement for their apartment structures. We want to make sure that, if they're getting a tax increment district approved, that they are not allowed to request those abatements until the TIF is actually paid off. We want to restrict the overlapping TIF districts to no more than 2 districts. We're going to include some performance measures so that we can ensure that the developers are actually meeting their targeted construction timeline, so that we can get those TIFs dissolved and the rest of the taxes dispersed to the taxing agencies. There are some provisions for developmental grants, and then we want to look very closely at the project costs. We've adjusted those just a bit, as you'll see in a later slide, I believe. And so then the eligible costs are specifically tied to public infrastructure needs. We currently have an administrative fee of $20,000, but we've also added the language to add 0.5% of the TIF total cost, whichever is greater. We found that there's a lot of staff time involved in not only putting the project plan together and reviewing it based on staff's time, but when the certification comes in, we're spending a lot of time on that. So we want to make sure that the actual individual, using up our time, or the company using our time for this particular application actually gets the reimbursement or the fee for that. And then also we've looked at the developer project costs so that we can refine those a little bit more. And again, we talked about the 2 districts, and no, state law doesn't allow for an identical boundary. We want to minimize the number of overlapping districts. And we're also looking at a maximum 3-year time frame for the city to accept the public infrastructure projects, so that we're not worried about spending any having any kind of expenditures go beyond that 5-year maximum time limit based on state law. So those are some of the things that we've revised with our current proposal.
Okay, in performing an evaluation of the application, we've determined that there are some base requirements that all projects need to meet with the application submittal. And so that would be a clear identification of the determining the necessity of the project, the but-for test. Financial feasibility and fiscal impact needs to be reviewed, and so we will expect detailed information from them, which we will then submit to a third party for review. There are financial consultants that work specifically with cities. Sioux Falls has a few companies they use and have recommended, and we feel like this would be very beneficial as we move forward in identifying whether or not a project is good and meets the criteria. They should also include in their application their cost projections, market analysis, and a legal review. Then in reviewing the merits of the application and the project, we have identified criteria upon which points can be achieved. So we have identified 18 criteria, and we have established a chart where they need to come up with at least 10 points. And there are several of these criteria wherein more than 1 point can be achieved. So as we have created this and then compared it to some existing applications or projects that are underway, there are some that would not meet the 10 points, but there are quite a few that would. And so I think what we're doing is just cleaning up the process and making sure that we're dealing with worthy projects that are actually eligible under all of the areas that we have identified. So I'm going to focus on some of these. I won't read through the entire list unless you have questions on them, but I did want to identify on the first criteria point, we actually have 2 points available if they fall within that priority area, the core community, or within one of the revitalization nodes or corridors. 1 point can be achieved if they fall within that second priority area. And then we go through the project here, a lot of different things that we can look at, but you'll note that in number 3 and number 4, we have the possibility of 2 points being met if they're providing economic development and taking care of blight. There's 2 points there. Same thing with, well, we'll get to the housing here in a minute, but then if they are achieving an entirely new business in the economic development targeted industry, the 2 points can be achieved there. So there are a lot of opportunities for points to be achieved outside of just falling within a priority core area. We do anticipate that it will be possible and probable that some TIF projects can be approved that do not fall within our priority area. There is enough opportunity in our criteria to allow for that. Moving down to number 9, we have identified affordable housing, and if they include that in their project, depending on the type of housing, they can get different points. Now, if they have 3 different types of housing product in their project, they could achieve up to 6 points if only in just this criteria point. So a lot of these focus around economic development and housing, but then there are other particular points that we feel are important in the consideration of whether or not this project should be eligible for TIF. One of those as well would be number 13, the participation rate. One of the things that we've noted with some of the past projects and also good recommendation from Sioux Falls is that there needs to be a higher level of participation from the developer rather than just 50% and having 50% covered by city TIF financing, that it should achieve 85%. That's actually a threshold that Sioux Falls now uses. So we've identified if we can meet that threshold, then there's a point achieved there. If we can get up to 90%, in other words, cities only putting in 10% with the TIF financing, then there's an additional point available there. So all of these criteria points, what we do, again, if we can come up with 10 points, then we're saying this should be eligible for approval. It's just really it's a guideline. Doesn't mean we have to achieve all these points, but I would say if we're not achieving those points, we need to come up with some good evidence or good reasoning why this project is otherwise eligible and should be approved. So it's a tool for us in performing our evaluation of the project. We have our process chart there. Don't know if we need to get into that, but we can answer questions. And then we have some examples here. I'll let Patsy review.
So this is just a one-year timeline. You know, I know that there's depreciation involved in, you know, a long-term capital project, but we just wanted to give a real quick overview. If we were just looking at 1 year at a time, how would the numbers come out? So we have a total cost submitted, you know, lot sales of $970,000, and then expenses of $1.4 million. and then, of course, some interest. And generally, if you just take the income and your expenses, it's about 200% loss, not quite. And, then the participation rate, of course, is 100%. Now, if we look at, one of the things in this particular proposal is staff had requested some additional construction for off-site sidewalks so that we can have some connectivity and some gaps that we had. So we had requested that this applicant include the cost of extending those sidewalks. Well, if there is no TIF involved, those sidewalks would not be required. So we also did a quick look at, how much it would cost them or what kind of profit they would have if those sidewalks were not included. So then they're down to, a little over 175% percentage, a decrease in their percentage amounts, their profit percentage. And so then we also looked at what the developer was really proposing with an application. So they are doing their own construction of the sidewalks that will be required with their subdivision. There's some industrial uses immediately adjacent to this proposal, and because it's a housing project, there are some requirements for screening. And so that was a cost that was submitted. The off-street sidewalks were included, and then so all of the costs that they're proposing for landscaping, off-site sidewalk, they have to relocate a street, they've got some drainage issues that they'll have to address, and then some grading. So this is really the percentage then, after all of those 5 different costs are included. So now they're at about 14.5% profit percentage. So what staff looked at is, are there any regional costs included in any of these proposed TIF-funded costs? And we did identify there are some local drainage costs, so we took that out of the proposal because, as consistent with the street network, really they should pay for their portion of the drainage associated with that particular development. So now we're down to about 3.5% from their profit to their expenses. So we just wanted to give you an idea how we would look at some of this stuff, just as a bottom line, 1-year timeline. And then the number that we're really interested in is really what's their participation rate. Now we're at least up to 52%. It doesn't meet one of our criteria for the 85% that we're targeting, but it's closer than what we've seen on some of them. So we just wanted to give you kind of a real quick overview of kind of how some of these numbers might play out. I'm sure that the developer would like more than what was proposed, but it's just a quick study for you.
So that's our presentation. Do you have questions?
Mr. Salomon, you have
All
the
right,
floor.
thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation and for all the work you did putting it together. Especially Patsy, I know you were working on this even before Ken was part of Rapid City, and so I know that this has been a long time coming. There's going to be a lot to chew on here, so just some initial impressions, just for the sake of discussion. What I appreciate is the clarity in the process. I really appreciate that we're using actual metrics that we can measure, like the AMI and where that threshold is for affordable housing, because that can be, it's so used in a pretty wide scale, and I want to make sure that we're defining that, but not locking it into a number that will always change, but by that percentage. I really appreciate that. And also the clarity of the process hopefully will help the speed of the process. So if there is an eligible TIF, that it's not waiting for too long and they're not missing their milestones and increasing their costs, because that's what happens as time goes on. If there's anything that I really appreciate some TIFs being used for is helping with some public infrastructure needs that we have. And sometimes we have an opportunity to upgrade our public infrastructure in addition to a development. And my only concern with the boundaries was that what if it falls outside those boundaries and we wouldn't be able to do that? I'm happy to hear that that is still possible should they get the point. So that when I was initially reviewing this some months ago, when you gave me kind of a draft version, That was my one probably big concern, but now, you know, the public infrastructure needs that we have. I'm happy to hear that we still have that. What I will have to chew on is what are there any unintended consequences to our changes that we're not seeing? And I think that's one thing, you know, I'd like to chew on and perhaps hear other people's points of view because, you know, I like what I'm seeing here. I like the point system. I like all of that. I like the clarity. There's a lot in this to like, and to make sure that we're being responsible. But TIFs are not a bad thing. They can be a very good thing, and Rapid City has benefited greatly from the use of TIFs. And perhaps some are wiser than others, and I think this helps us, gives us some good guardrails to move forward with. So there'll be lots of discussion and thought and everything else, and should I have any, I'll let you know. But I did just want to appreciate you both for presenting, and Patsy, I know, for all your hard work, and you know, maybe you can actually do some other cool things as well. So with that, I'll yield. Thank you.
Let me just say, again, I'd like to leave our doors open. If you would like to come in and chat and get some, you know, get into the weeds a little deeper on this, we'd love to be able to do that. We want you to feel comfortable with whatever is coming forward.
Mr. Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair, and I just wanted to thank you and your staff. I think you guys have done a great job with this, Mr. Young and Patsy. I appreciate the work you've done. You know how I have been a critic at times over the years, but I think this is a step in the right direction. I think most importantly, and it kind of dovetails with what was previously said here, is that Mr. Solomon is saying that it creates greater definition, but I think what more importantly goes along with that is transparency in government, because citizens can understand when we say affordable housing project that's going to be covered by a TIF, they understand it's going to be under some sort of definition that can be measured rather than just the vernacular word of affordable housing. So I think that's another part of the steps that we're taking here. I don't think it's everything that I'd like to see, but I don't get everything I want, and neither do people who want just open borders on TIFs. So, you know, from that standpoint, I think it is a very big improvement to the process. It's been long needed. I think it brings credibility to the process and accountability on top of the transparency that I've already talked about. The one question I had for you, and I think it was covered in there, and this may be too detailed, but it's more about the oversized costs with public infrastructure, as Mr. Solomon brought up. I just want to make sure that that's going to be probably under the excessive development costs if there's oversizing that we're going to require in a new development. I just was wondering if that was part of that excessive development costs. If that was okay, very good. And so I just really like where it's going. That it's very good for the city and very good for the taxpayer. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to make a motion to acknowledge.
It's 30 in these chambers. I welcome the public to attend our next session. I welcome a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a safe and happy Halloween.
You too. Just by information, I think is back on. Is plan another session, probably in the same manner that we're doing now, not with the same presentation, but just an opportunity to discuss any issues, anything that's hanging out, and we'll do that before coming forward in the official process. We are going to make this presentation to Planning Commission at their meeting, get any feedback we have from them. We'll reach out to you again by email, say, hey, any concerns, issues, whatever. Then we'll plan to come back in this type of format. Thank you.